It's very moving. It was very moving for me to be invited to participate in this conference, and it's moving and it's very sad, of course, that such a tragedy convenes us here. I would like to tell you about Israeli occupation or Israeli control and rule over Palestinians through the experiences of 3 of my friends. It was quite difficult to choose among all my friends the examples, and I didn't pick up the worst examples one could find, because it's also part of the problem of media coverage, that if it does concentrate on something, it would be on the most difficult cases, which sometimes are not being taken as representative because they are not the rule. They are not, it's not something that happens to everybody. Death, injury, it is still a minority that experiences this. What I picked up is typical life of 3 of my best friends, Palestinian friends, that I think can illuminate about Israeli occupation and can illuminate about Israeli purposes and Israeli occupation. I'll start with the best of all, and it's very sad for me to tell about him because he just left for England. He was forced to leave for England and for London to study, to do his PhD in math education in London. Now, this is an opportunity that everybody would have taken gladly. He did, but also with mixed feelings, because actually he intended to study in Haifa University, where he was already admitted as a PhD student. He already has a supervisor, one of the best professors in the world for math education. Her name is Anna Sfard. I'm proud that I made this match between the two. And this looked like a very logical step for someone who was born in the refugee camp of Shati, in the beach camp in Gaza Strip, a child of refugees from Ashdod, to the south of, today south of Israel, or between north of Gaza. It's very normal a move for somebody who is married to an Israeli Palestinian, another one, or a Palestinian citizen of Israel, also of Nazareth. And they've been together since 1990 or 1991. That is almost 16 years together. But it was not so natural for Israel to accept this natural thing. He was refused permit to go from Ramallah to Haifa University. He did his first semester by correspondence, emailing with his professor. I smuggled, also I'm proud to admit, I smuggled his professor. She came to Ramallah to see him 2 or 3 times, even though it is forbidden for Israelis to enter the Palestinian Authority territories. He was denied access to Haifa for security reasons, very, very dangerous. And not only that, he's not only denied access to Haifa. Actually, according to Israeli new and old regulations, he's also illegal in his own home in Ramallah. As a Gazan, he's considered illegal. All Gazans who live now in the West Bank are illegal sojourners, or whatever you call it in this bureaucratic language of occupation. All of them are illegal. So I need to go back a little historical note here. Actually, since 91, there was no difference between a resident of Gaza and a resident of the West Bank in terms of where they live. And many Gazans moved to the West Bank, especially for those who wanted to study better, to get better education in the West Bank, and stayed there, got a job like normal people. I don't know how many of you have stayed in the very same place, very same city in all their lives. Just Palestinians as well. They moved, they went to learn in one place, found work another place, got married with somebody from another city, and settled down wherever they wanted, more or less, in the territories occupied in '67. And so did my friend, his name is Jihad, and so did my friend Jihad. But then, during the Oslo years, they discovered that Israel does not, we'll tackle this later on, it's the Israeli policy of permit, it's a permit system that Israel imposed since '91. So actually since '91, Gazans discovered that they cannot move freely from Gaza to the West Bank, and vice versa. This only worsened during Oslo, during the process, the so-called peace process. You would expect the opposite, but no. It was more difficult, and actually impossible, to go between Gaza and the West Bank, or to get permits to go from Gaza and the West Bank. What Israel demanded is that people who those who stay in Ramallah and could go out of the West Bank should have a residency of the West Bank. So you would say the natural thing to do would be to change the address. But there they discovered, during the Oslo, during the peace years, that Israel does not allow Gazans to change their address from Gaza to the West Bank. So here is a man like Jihad, born in 1967 with Israeli occupation, August '67, a student of math, a bright student of math. It's a very nice phenomenon of Gaza that there are many very good math students who all went to Birzeit. Except of Jihad, none has remained. One went back to Rafah, it's also a good friend of ours, and all the rest have gone abroad. Jihad did not want, he wanted to stay. He wanted to stay in the country. He wanted to improve math education in Palestinian schools. He didn't get a permit. He's illegal in Ramallah. And since 2000, since the outbreak of the Second Intifada, actually he discovered, like many other Gazans, that any moment, at any checkpoint, he may be apprehended by Israeli soldiers and sent to the West Bank, to the Gaza Strip, sorry. Sent because he was illegal, as if he were an illegal sojourner in Israel proper. So actually, for the last 6 years, he didn't move out of Ramallah. He was confined to the borders of Ramallah. He lost all sense of geography. We used to joke that anything north to Birzeit University was a completely terra incognita for him. And anything south, then southern to Manara Square is also an unknown territory. He was arrested during this intifada, like many men. He was taken from the house, like many young men, he was taken from the house by Israeli soldiers, sent to something like 18 or 15 days or 5, I don't remember, at a detention camp nearby. He didn't know, his wife did not know, his child did not know if he would be deported to Gaza or not. Luckily, there was a lot of still confusion or disorganization within the army, and he was not deported back to Gaza. But you can only imagine in what fear and incertitude they lived for all this time. So, there is my friend, illegal in Ramallah. His wife, as an Israeli Palestinian, is going between Nazareth and Ramallah, is illegal in Ramallah. Their son, who has an Israeli identity card, is also illegal in Ramallah. And myself, an Israeli journalist, when we were together sitting, I was the only one legal in Ramallah. This was, now, I know, well, you know, privileges are habits which die hard, being privileged. Now we hoped that somehow the fact that he's being admitted to PhD at the Israeli university would convince the Israeli authorities that maybe this has some potential. This has some potential for excuse me, but I really hate the word peace. It was contaminated during the last 10 years, during the last 15 years. But that this would bring some sense to some people in the Israeli authorities. It did not. Also, Israeli judges of the High Court of Justice were not convinced. They got a secret report by the Israeli intelligence that Jihad is dangerous. Bullshit. I know him better than anybody of those intelligence people. And if there is something dangerous about him, is that he is bright, and is the fact that he is married to an Israeli. Because by being married to an Israeli, they might demand again. They actually asked for it and were denied. Their right, just as I have the right, to become also an Israeli resident. If not a citizen, then an Israeli resident. They asked for this family reunification years ago, and they were denied also for security reasons before any declared policy about it. Now, I could tell a lot about Jihad because I could tell a lot about the way he laughs, about all the depression that we all lived through during the last half a year when it was not clear whether he would be allowed to go to study in Haifa or not. What it meant for us to realize that our dream and our plot to send him to Haifa, to realize that this cannot materialize. I could also tell another angle. The first, now he's going to stay with my friends in London. Israeli Jews who have left because they were so tired of being impotent in the fight against Israeli occupation. And they actually emigrated to England a few years ago. And he's going to stay with them for a while until his wife and child join them. So in the application for a visa, he wrote his address. He said, Jihad, care of Cohen family. So this was one of the nice aspects of... actually, we had the farewell party in my place last Sunday, and some of my Israeli friends, and I don't care if there is somebody here from the Israeli intelligence who would, anyway, they know. I declare again, they came to my flat illegally. So there were quite a few, and there were some other Gazans in the flats and some other illegals in Ramallah, and for a farewell party for Jihad. And on the way, when I gave on the phone instructions to my friends, by accident they were for the Pesach here, the Cohen family. So they were coming and I gave instructions how to reach my place. So they drove through all the empire roads, the huge roads for Jews only. And they saw the wall, and for the first time for them. And my friend asked me, how come you don't become sick out of it all? So I asked her, what makes you think that I did not become sick of it all? But this is an aside. Now, if we take Jihad's case, what does it reflect? What does it tell about Israeli policies? First, the Cohen prevented from movement or from doing something for security reasons. Very often it is, I mean, more generally than not, it comes, or the authorities are covering themselves by this vague and very, very secret statement in order to precede a policy. With Jihad's case, it's when he was announced unfit for reunification in Israel or living in Israel with his wife for security reasons, it preceded the present policy that does not allow Israeli Palestinians who are Israeli citizens, does not allow them actually to marry Palestinians from the occupied territories. Okay, it allows them, but it does not allow them to live together in Israel. I can get married with anybody in the world, maybe except of a Palestinian, and this person will be allowed entry and residency in Israel. But not Jihad Eshwech with his wife, and not other Palestinians who are married to Palestinians who are Israeli citizens who are married to Palestinians. This is the sacred Israeli policy of keeping the demographic balance, so-called. But there is another thing to it. What Jihad's case represents is the policy of separating Gaza from the West Bank. This is not a policy that started with disengagement. This is a policy that started in 91 with the closure policy that we will discuss later. Separating Gaza from the West Bank is actually separating the populations from each other, separating the economies from each other, separating social developments from each other, pushing Gaza towards Egypt by blocking all its access, traditional access which were built since 67 to the West Bank. You see with Jihad that Israeli authorities did not allow him to change his address from Gaza to the West Bank. Israel still controls, and controlled during the Oslo period, controlled the registry of population. Now, this is something that I found very difficult to explain to people, also during the Oslo years, because people assumed that the Oslo years were advancing towards peace, and that Israel would take all measures necessary to give Palestinians this kind of freedom within the population life, and actually what proved was the opposite. Because Israel is, if Israel does not register somebody who was born, does not register the newborn in its computer, does not register people who get married, does not register death, does not register change of address, this as if never happened. So people would face difficulties when they go from one checkpoint to another, because the soldier would have not updated data in the computer, and then he can decide what happens to these people. Imagine a married couple with a child wants to go from the West Bank to Jordan. If the newborn child is not registered in the Israeli computer, which controls the Palestinian computer, then they cannot go with the child. Or they cannot come back with the child. So it has a lot of ramifications that it would need 2 sessions here just to describe. But this is one of the little, so-called little, but very big details, very imposing details of control over Palestinian life that remained intact during the Oslo years, and even worsened during the last 5 years, and with the disengagement. Now, Gazans, supposedly liberated from Israeli occupation, still have to register in order to exist, still have to register in Israeli computer in order to exist. What Jihad's case also represents is the fact that Jews and Arabs in Israel have completely different rights, or better to say that we have the rights and Palestinians in Israel have a lower set of rights. It can imply much more. I want to proceed to 2 other friends of mine. a couple, Khaled and Fadia. He is a lawyer. I live in their house actually. I mean, we live in the same house. They are my neighbors and friends. They come from two different villages near Tulkarem and Kalkilia. They have 4 adorable kids. Whenever I want to take a rest from my thoughts, from the yoke of thoughts and events, I go down to play with them. When I moved there in 2003, the kids were still using the term the Jews when they wanted to say that the army is coming. By living there with them and stressing that I'm a Jew and the army is not the Jews, but it's an army of occupation, they learned how to distinguish. But then sometimes it's very funny, they say, we saw Jews, we saw Jews. And I say, what did you see? You saw the army? No, no, real Jews, real Jews. And, and they meant actually a huge group of Israeli activists who smuggled into Ramallah for some protest 2 years ago. Also at the beginning when I lived there, when the small one, Tutu, was Tarek, was all of a sudden, I think he got it from my neighbors, the other neighbors' kids, he was afraid to come to my flat because he supposed there was a tank in my flat. As a good Jew, I'm supposed to have a tank. So we went hand in hand, he was 3 years old, we went hand in hand from room to room to check and to make sure that there was no tank. Until 2000, Fridays were the normal day for the whole family to go and visit their relatives and especially the grandparents in both villages. It was a matter of maybe 40 minutes drive. Since 2000, it became impossible, since September 2000. For a whole year, I think, Fadia, my friend, could not visit her ailing parents because of the closure of all the areas between Ramallah and Tulkarem, where her parents live. Closure by really physical closure. Earth mounds, checkpoints, soldiers keeping all cars away, closed areas, closed zones, closed military zones, whatever. It would take a normal person about maybe in a good, at best, some 8 hours to reach this distance of 40 minutes drive. So then a mother of 4 children had to make a choice, this terrible choice between her children and her parents. She could not visit her parents. And I know what it is to be so far away from a mother who is ill. And you know that you are unable to assist a mother who is ill. The same thing with Khaled, her husband. He could not visit his family. Then October 2002, Khaled's family, which lives near the Green Line at the west of the West Bank, near Kalkilia, got orders of seizure of land for the wall, for the security wall. Until then, until 2000, this piece of land, this remaining 60 dunams that the family had, they had 100 dunams in 48, the big family, 40 dunams were left in Israel after 48, 60 remained in the village. And these 60 were the future of the whole family, property of the whole family, kind of guarantee that they could send children to school, to study, to work, to develop. It was also a place of recreation. That's where children were playing and getting to know. They came from the city. They came to know the nature with their grandparents. Now with these orders of seizure of land, everything that they have worked in this land was lost. Water system that they built. the greenhouses that they constructed. It was a very rocky land, so it cost a lot of money to flatten it. This all money gone. The land as investment for the future was gone. Theoretically, the 60 or 50 out of the 60, 50 dunams are still the families, but they are beyond the wall or beyond the fence. Now, to reach this land, the people need a permit from Israeli authorities. And when we say you need a permit, you need a permit, it doesn't mean you get a permit. This is first. Second, it's very humiliating to ask for a permit to reach your own land, or to go to see your family in Gaza, or to go to your workplace. It is very humiliating, degrading, annoying, infuriating, and many people just do not do it for this very reason. Anyway, to reach their land, which means their orchards, their olive trees, their the land for cultivation of vegetables, you need a permit. Then you get a permit once in a while. Then only the parents get a permit. The children, they are grown up. They are working all over. The grandchildren do not get the permits. They are not considered of first of kin or first degree family. So they do not get permits to help, to assist the older parents. I asked Khaled, the neighbor, who is a lawyer, why didn't he insist on them having a permit for others in the family? He said, even if I insisted and we would go, okay, for a few days, a couple of days, to work on the land, especially when you have to pick up the olives, even then there is no use for the work invested, because there is such surplus of oil now, because nobody can market it. So the cost, what you get for the oil does not cover the costs of the work. So what's the use of letting them work so hard? It will only break their heart even more. Every Friday, now for the last year, it is easier to leave Ramallah and go to visit the family in Tulkarem and Kalkilia. Easy would mean that it takes now 3 hours instead of 8 hours or 2 days, in comparison to the 40 minutes that it really takes. And very often we live together, the house. I go to Tel Aviv, which is further than Kalkilia or Tulkarem. They go to Tulkarem and Kalkilia. You don't have to guess. You don't have to work hard in order to guess who gets first. I get first because also I can go through privileged roads for Jews only. In practice, not by law, but in practice, roads which are accessible to me as a Jew and not accessible to them as Palestinians. And if they do reach those roads eventually through bypass roads, then there are so many flying checkpoints, not constant checkpoints, that prevent or that stop Palestinian cars from going in their own territory, that people are discouraged also to go from one place to another. And this is actually how, and this is what it means, first of all, about the West Bank. And this is one thing that you all have to remember. The West Bank was chopped into enclaves by this policy of closure and checkpoints. It was shredded into separate enclaves and distant enclaves. Even a near, very close, adjacent areas are very far from each other. Yes. The road system. By this shredding of the West Bank into separate enclaves, or little prisons actually, this confinement of people to their areas, you don't have to be an economist in order to assess the economical deterioration that is caused by this. If a driver of vegetables or of some other goods has to go 8 hours instead of 1 hour, or to drive in very bad detours and then go to the garage to change wheels or to work on his car every 1 month instead of every half year, then you can imagine how it affects the whole economy. This enclosure policy separates between families, destroys social contacts, destroys family habits and cultures and traditions. It shrinks the space, it shrinks the horizons in which everybody lives. Actually, it is what happened in Gaza when Gaza was separated since 91, and actually since 2000 there is a duplication of the Gaza Strip in the West Bank. The West Bank is actually comprised of at least 8 different Gaza strips, which are separated from each other by a network of checkpoints, of roadblocks, of Israeli regulations and Israeli restrictions. The third couple of friends that I want to talk about them is, and the last, and I'll be very brief, are Maysoon and Saleh from Nablus. Nablus is the only city that has been constantly since 2000 encircled by completely by Israeli checkpoints, so that you cannot, or Israeli barriers, so that you cannot leave without being monitored, and actually by being very often by being impeded or stopped by Israeli soldiers. While from Ramallah it is possible to find 1 or 2 routes that are not controlled by Israeli checkpoints, Nablus is also encircled by those checkpoints. Maysoon is a teacher. Her husband Saleh is an employee with the PLO office. They have 4 children. Even if I had more time in this session, I wouldn't have had time to describe what it was to live for almost 2 years constantly under Israeli tanks. Israeli tanks which practically were in the same street where they live. One of the children actually has had such traumas for so long that they even thought of sending him away to recover somewhere else. Now he grew up. Luckily, he overcame these traumas. He doesn't wake up at night wet and screaming. He's not as violent as he was 2 years ago. But a few weeks ago, when the army, as it happens all the time, entered the refugee camp of Balata, which is not far away from their place, from where they live, friends told his father that he was seen throwing stones at jeeps, military jeeps. Now, the parents are very much against the sort of armed struggle which turned into futile bravado in front of cameras, of carrying guns and doing nothing, or going to explode in Israel proper. Both parents were wanted in the first Intifada. The father was in prison for a couple of years. So it's not people who were far away from Palestinian struggle. But now the father tells me, I cannot sleep at night. If 2-3 years ago he couldn't sleep at night because of his son's traumas, now he cannot sleep at night because of his son participating in throwing stones. But he says, I cannot tell him not to throw stones. It's his classmates who are under curfew now in Balata. And this is what he sees as a civil protest against Israeli occupation. But again, he cannot sleep quietly at night. Maysoon, the teacher, whenever she wants to visit her family who live in a nearby village, has to go through a checkpoint. Now, this meant that it's about a 15 kilometers distance, something like 7-8 miles distance. For 2 years, she could not visit her family. Now she can visit, but because they removed one of these checkpoints. But then now it is a flying checkpoint, which means it's not every day. But when there is a checkpoint there, it keeps people, it's one of the most vicious checkpoints that exist. It keeps people there waiting for between 3 hours to 18 hours. And this I checked and monitored. At one point, and because it's such a narrow road that when you are stuck there and they don't let you move, you just can't move back either. So this is her village. When she goes to work, it's on the southern side of Nablus. She also has to go through a checkpoint or a barrier, which means being always late for school or getting up very early not to get late to school. And again, it's a distance of 5 kilometers. So to pass a distance of 5 kilometers, she needs at least an hour and a half. Both of them, because they are employees of the Palestinian Authority and PLO, are gone this month without any salary. It's almost, they haven't received yet, I think. So it's almost the end of the month and there is no salary. There is no salary. Okay, we know Hamas. But there is at least $50 million every month that Israel owes to the Palestinians and refuses to give them. So we are not talking here about only the grab of land that we saw with the village of Khaled, that the land was taken for the fence. And I forgot, of course, to mention, but this goes without saying, that of course some land has been taken during the years for a settlement nearby. We're not talking about the land that Maysoon's family lost not for settlements, but for all kinds of Israeli training camps in the Jordan Valley. We're also talking about actual theft of money. It's monies that Israel, because all Palestinian import goes through Israeli ports and Israeli customs, then it's Israeli bureaucracy which gets the customs, and according to the Oslo Agreement, it has to pay back the money which belongs to the Palestinian tax authorities. It refuses to do so now for the second or third month already, which means it's already $150 million, which means the salaries of so many people. These not very horrendous examples, not horrendous because we are talking about people who still can do something with their life and work hard in order to provide some future for their children and keep their sanity and keep their resilience, like most of the people. But their life, the way that they are being chained by Israeli rule, shows that occupation is not good anymore as a definition. It's not satisfactory. Occupation or military. It's much more than military occupation. We are talking here about a blend of military occupation, indeed, an envelope that allowed Israel to develop a colonialist system and an apartheid system. And I will not discuss now the issue of Israel proper, mostly because of shortage of time. But actually we are talking Palestinians in the occupied territories live under this threefold regime: military occupation, colonialist regime, and an apartheid regime. An apartheid regime that is, when I say apartheid regime, I refer to the fact that we are talking about the same chunk of territory which is ruled and whose development or undevelopment is being dictated by one government. There are two peoples, two communities which live in this same chunk of territory. And there is one government which is elected only by one community, not by the other. But this government decides about the two peoples, about the future of the two peoples, not only about the future of one people, which elects it. And in this same chunk of territory, there are two sets of infrastructure. Elite infrastructure for the Jews, inferior infrastructure for Palestinians. It's true about roads, it's true about water, quota on water. There is a quota on the quantities of water for Palestinians. There are mechanisms which guarantee that Palestinians will not get the same quantities as Jews get. Okay. There is a set of the two different sets of rights and privileges. We are privileged, the Jews. And a privilege is when a right is not given to everybody, this right is a mutilated right. Then it becomes a privilege. And we live with this, Jews live with these mutilated rights. We enjoy these mutilated rights. I have to wrap up, I was told. And I had some other nice... no, you have to... Okay. Maybe I'll have another opportunity to give some of those to refer, but I will allow myself, I know that I'm glad because Diana will talk about closure, but there is one thing that I want to say, how closure, the closure policy, which is the Israeli pass system, when it was introduced in 91, it was a major change. It was a major change because if until 91, the freedom of movement, the right for freedom of movement was actually acknowledged by Israel as a right and was allowed for all the Palestinians except a few categories that were not allowed. But all the Palestinians were granted the freedom of movement except of a few categories. Now this was reversed in 91. All the Palestinians were denied freedom of movement except of a few categories, and always decided by Israel which categories are allowed to go, to have some freedom, again, privilege of freedom of movement, and what numbers. The numbers kept changing. But this policy has been scrutinized and developed and streamlined during the last 14, 15 years. It started before Oslo, it developed with Oslo, and it was deepened and enhanced during the last 5, 6 years. Always with the pretext of security. And this is where I want to. Indeed, it's much safer for Israelis if Palestinians cannot move at all. It's much safer for settlers and for Israelis in Israel. Because anybody who wants to commit a suicide attack in Israel, indeed, will be spotted. If there was total curfew, 24 hours per day on all Palestinians, this would have been great. Now, security measures are taken not separate and not autonomously of the position of the target population. I always compare it to the attitude of the measures taken against men. Excuse me. About every second day, a woman is being raped in Israel. I guess it's similar all over the world. There are about 200,000 women who are being beaten up by their husbands daily or on a regular basis. I guess it's also true about other societies in the world. There are women being murdered by men, by their husbands. So potentially, half of the population is being threatened on a daily basis by the other half of the population. Now, I never heard that in Israel or in any other place in the world, they suggested to put men under night curfew, for example. or to actually demand men to sign a certain voucher that he does not abuse his wife. And if he does, he will lose his job or something like that. So measures are taken according to the goal or according to the place, to the position of this population in the society. And these measures of closure have guaranteed the process of colonization in Israel and of dismembering, fragmenting Palestinian territory and Palestinian society. This is why this closure policy is the best Israeli weapon so far. And most dangerous, of course. Thank you.
You've been listening to part 2 of From Occupation to Enclosure, Fragmenting the Palestinian State. Our speaker is Israeli journalist and writer Amira Hass. In a moment, we will return to the question and answer segment of the program. Amira Hass lives and works in the occupied territories of the West Bank and Gaza. In 1993, she became the first Israeli reporter to live in Gaza, reporting on the grim realities of the Israeli occupation for Haaretz, an Israeli daily newspaper, which is available in English translation through their website. Amira Hass received the International World Press Freedom Award for her work in the Gaza Strip. Her time there also resulted in her first book, Drinking the Sea at Gaza, Days and Nights in a Land Under Siege, first published in 1996, the English translation appearing in 1999. She is also author of Reporting from Ramallah, an Israeli journalist in an occupied land. And now we return to the question and answer segment of the program. One question for Amira Hass was, how do you get past the fears and concerns for security that often dominate this topic to persuade a broader community to become involved and informed about these issues?
It's very, very difficult to penetrate through this wall of white indifference all over about other, or the oppressor and the privileged don't want to listen. And the question is how to make them listen, indeed. So you might have a chance with some to speak some words of reason. For example, the disclosure policy, which is a major violation of human rights, started in 1991, long before anybody of the Palestinians dreamt about suicide attacks. So it had nothing to do with suicide attacks. It had to do with containment of the first Intifada, which was a popular uprising. This is one thing that you may use. You may also use my argument about attitude to men and rapists. Then South Africans black South Africans had all sorts of atrocities during the fight against apartheid rule. This did not make their fight unjust or did not make apartheid right. I'm sure we can bring such examples from other places as well. But there is a problem here, and I hope this comes up, especially in such audience which cares. It's not an audience that is ignorant or does not care about Palestinian freedom and justice. And there is a problem with Palestinian resistance. There is a problem that, or let me say, Israel plays chess. Palestinians play ping pong. Palestinians behave as if Israel plays ping pong. But Israel plays chess in the sense that they are planning 10, 20, 30 steps ahead. So take the closure policy. Everybody took it as an ad hoc policy. But then Israel it was not severe from the start, but it became more and more severe with time. Israel using every suicide attack in order to make it stricter, and always using what seemed very plausible argument that Palestinians are using the freedom of movement in order to commit suicide in Israel. So, or to smuggle arms through Gaza, outside of Gaza. So it was very difficult to argue. the separation of the West Bank into different distinct parts, and where Palestinians of the north are not allowed now to go south. Now, this has been used several times during the last year. But then one time when I wrote about it, it made quite a big scandal. Even Haaretz considered it as a very major offense of Palestinian, or violation of Palestinian human rights. And then under this pressure, the army had to withdraw and to allow again Palestinians go from the north to the south. And then one guy, we don't know from where, had a suicide attack somewhere. They returned these restrictions on movement from the north to the south. And again, they did it even more strictly last week after another big major suicide attack in Tel Aviv. Which means so far, and this has been, we can go one by one to show how Israel, according to a plan, but always perfected its policy in timing, in synchronization with these attacks, pretending that this is a response to the attacks and not a response and not a plan. So it's very difficult to fight. It's your difficulty is not subjective. You're subjective or those who listen to you. I do think that here in this audience we do have to discuss Palestinian forms of resistance, or actually the failure of Palestinian organizations and leadership to translate the resilience, the amazing resilience of 3.5 million people. It's to live under this occupation needs a lot of resources and stamina and determination and courage to live under these circumstances and to laugh and to continue living. It's amazing. So we are talking about a resilience of 3.5 million people. But the Palestinians failed, organizations and leaders, to translate this into strategy, into strategized resistance. When does a resilience become a resistance of the community? When it is being strategized. And Palestinian groups were engaged in a tactics of revenge, of reaction, as I said, ping pong. And this played into the hands of Israel, unfortunately.
You've been listening to part 2 of From Occupation to Enclosure, Fragmenting the Palestinian State. Our speaker has been Israeli journalist and writer Amira Hass. Amira Hass spoke on a panel with Palestinian-Canadian lawyer Diana Boutou on April 22, 2006, at South Puget Sound Community College in Olympia, Washington. This panel discussion, featuring Diana Boutou and Amira Hass, was part of the Rachel Corrie Foundation Peaceworks Conference, Cultivating a Just and Enduring Peace for the People of Palestine and Israel. For more information about the Peaceworks Conference and about the Rachel Corrie Foundation for Peace and Justice, please visit their website at www.rachelcorriefoundation.org. This program was produced by PDX Media Productions. Along with our other programs, this program is now available as streaming video on the World Wide Web. For more information about our programs and for broadcast dates and times, please visit our website at www.pdxjustice.org. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for supporting public access cable television, net neutrality, and all forms of grassroots democratic community media.